as well as being streamed live on YouTube. And for members of the public and media are also welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions that are currently taking place. I would now like to introduce myself and fellow committee members. I'll start with those present in the room. As I said, my name is Andy Neil. And go around the room this way.
So I'm Emma. I'm the clerk to the committee.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lawrence Weeks. I'm from Kensington Aldridge Academy. I'm a substitute for David Best.
Stephen Keogh, Chief Finance Officer at St John Southwest Academy Trust.
Amanda Sayers, Chairman of the Board at All Saints and representing secondary schools here.
Mariella Armstrong, Principal at Chelsea Academy.
Dave Sellens, I'm the head at Thomas Jones School.
Peter Bassett, Governor at Avondale and St Anne's Federation.
I'm Jeanette Still from the hospital.
Hello, Ratcliffe Colliver, Principal Early Academy Thieves.
Hi, I'm Richard Stanley, Deputy Director of Education, and as an officer in attendance at this meeting today.
I'm Craig Hammersmith, I'm the Centre Principal for the North Kensington Centre College of Morley College, number 16 to 19 representative.
Alison Melvin, Chair of Governors at Thunderbolt Primary School.
Right, if we go to members online first, forum members online. We start with Sarah.
Oh, good evening. I'm Sarah Bowett. I'm Executive Head Teacher at St Thomas's and St Clement at St James.
Jagdeep.
I'm Jagdeep Birdie. I'm the Executive Head Teacher at Colville and Marlborough Primary Schools.
Okay, great. Claire.
I'm Claire Dimpful, Head of Tadpoles Nursery School, representing the PVI sector.
Okay, great. And then officers joining online. Anita.
Hi, I'm Anita Stokes. I'm the Strategic Finance Manager for Children's Services.
Okay, Julie.
Hello, I'm Julie Ely. I'm the Assistant Director for SEN Education Psychology.
Okay, great. Thank you. Right, if we move on to item A1, apologies for absence. We've had apologies received from Michelle McWalter, Ian Heggs, Sarah Newman, Wasim Butt, and also David Benton, but Lawrence is sitting in his place. Any other apologies that anyone's been passed or know of? We've got Kathleen coming in.
Yep.
Okay, we've got Kathleen Williams joining the meeting now online. Let's move on to A2, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations to make? Fantastic. Item A3, minutes from the last meeting, which was on the 15th of June 2022, so that's an awfully long time ago. Were there any comments?
Yes, I have a small one.
It's a Peter, thank you.
Item A3, line 4, the date of 30th of March seems to have been inserted erroneously.
Yeah.
So it needs to be struck.
Peter, thank you. Lawrence, did you have something?
No, I'm just.
Stretch. Any other matters from the minutes? Okay, great. Okay, is it your wish that I sign them off as the correct record?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Right, item A4, high needs update. Julie, I believe you are to everything on this. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you very much. This paper sets out the recent consideration by the High Needs Block review group, particularly with regard to clawback, and paragraphs 4 sets out that we've had some meetings in this term, and as a result of the advice from colleagues on that group, we're doing some further modelling. We're looking particularly at the spend in the autumn term 2021 as compared to the spend in 2022, and we're looking at the actual banding levels attached to individual students. And we're aiming to have that piece of work completed by the end of the autumn term to be able to report back to the review group in spring and to be able to bring a timely recommendation to Forum by April, so that any recruitment implications are known to schools before they go out to recruit staff in May. At the review group, we did talk about what the alternatives might be, and we had a really good discussion about whether or not indefinite capping of bands 8 to 10 might provide an alternative. So that's something that the review group want to come back and consider. And as a recommendation from the discussion this term, it's proposed to have the capping in place for the remainder of this academic year, and to get that message out to people as quickly as possible that's going to be in place. The report also covers our participation in the DfE's Delivering Best Value DBV programme, where Kensington is one of 55 local authorities in the line for some additional funding. Potentially we can bid for up to £1 million for our high needs block, and the bidding opens in January. It can't be used to fund the deficit, but it can be used for activity which the diagnostic part of the DVV identifies is likely to help us manage our deficit pressures most effectively. And at the moment, we're working with Consultants Newton Europe from the DfE. I'm able to give some feedback on some of the work that was reflected back to us last week, which was around our biggest pressures being what we're paying to the independent non-maintained sector. That won't come as a surprise to anybody at Forum, because we've seen that in the reports. So a bit of an update that work is continuing, and potentially we can bid for £1 million in January. The third thing that the report is covering is hospital education, which is funded from the high needs block, and Schools Forum had asked officers to develop a service level agreement between the council and the governing body, and that very detailed and lengthy work is with the governing body is continuing. The report also highlights in para 5.2 that some additional funding was received from the DfE as a result of the additional costs incurred relocating to the Bayswater Children's Centre. The lease for the temporary use of that accommodation was due to end in September this year, but an extension has been granted until the end of this academic year to July 23. Thank you. Any questions?
Julie, can I just ask, so it opens in paragraph 3.7, you can bid for up to £1 million. What is the timeline on that? When would you find out if that would have been successful?
It's an incredibly intense timescale. We'll be able to bid in January, and we will know by the end of March if we've got the funding.
And will that funding go into this financial year?
So it won't be, we have to spend it within, but by the 31st of March, but it will be available to us to spend over the next 2 to 3 years, because that's the timescale for the deficit. Yeah, so it depends on what we bid for.
Okay, great. Thanks, Julie. Right, any questions on paper A4? David?
Hi, Julie. I hope you're well. First question I have is, who sat on that high needs block reference group on this occasion? What was the makeup of that group of people?
Veronica and sorry, I haven't got the notes. Freddie and Anne Slavin, this particular last meeting, and Paul usually chairs the meetings, but he wasn't at the one that we had last week.
The second one I have is at the forthcoming heads briefing, primary heads briefing. Do you think it might be feasible for you to attend and just it wasn't a huge long presentation. Useful for primary heads. They may have questions for you. I think that would be useful time if feasible.
Yeah. Yeah, it depends on Julie's availability, but we can certainly put that on the head teacher's briefing agenda, but sort of happy to
Yeah,
catch
be
up
very
anyway.
happy to.
There we go.
And the third one, Chair, is item 4.2, where it references, where it recognising this could be a significant challenge for school in deficit or risk of deficit. I think it'd be a challenge for any school that has limited funds, to be frank. I don't think it's just schools that are in deficit or likely to be.
Yeah, sorry, that was in reference to, we had agreed a sort of safety valve arrangement, hadn't we? We'd said that if any school were particularly going to face difficulty, and that was the description that we had for schools at that point. But yeah, I completely take your point about, you know, the funding pressures that all schools are facing.
Thank you.
Just to be clear, you mentioned about the putting a bid in, and it depends what you bid for. Is there sort of a set of criteria against this bidding? I'm clear that it can't be used for this, that, and the third thing, but I'm just going back to what David said. Who are those people whose names you mentioned? Are they head teachers? Are they governors? And
It's a different main primary and early years sectors. I think we've had, Julie, if I just jump in, quite difficulty. Quite a lot of people have volunteered to be on the working party for SEM, but the numbers attending those meetings really has tailed off. It's quite disappointing. So I think we need to go back into those consultatives and find out who the original volunteers were. Because I think it's quite difficult, Julie, for you to really...
Yeah, it is. There is a fixed terms of reference, which covers a representation of all sectors, all settings, and we have had people put themselves forward to take part in it. But you're right, Andrew. There have been times when it's been difficult for people to take part in the meetings, obviously conflicting priorities. In answer to the question about the bidding, we're having to go through a very detailed process with Newton Europe. We've had to submit, it's Newton Europe and SIPFA on behalf of the DFE. We've had to submit our deficit management plan. We've had to send them all of our data for the last 5 years. We've had to give them a very significant analysis of why we think we're able to take the steps that we're taking to mitigate our spend. We're also having to host a week's worth of deep dive case reviews next week, and a number of head teacher colleagues are taking part in that. There are 4 of them, and they're 4 hours long each. So we have to go through all of this diagnostics to give the DFE confidence that we will spend the money wisely, and the themes that emerge from the diagnostic will be what they are expecting us to bid for. So our bid will only be successful if we can evidence that we will show due diligence and that the funding will have the right impact. So that's sort of an overarching criteria.
Julie, any other questions? Yes, Jeanette.
Hi. I just want to move on to hospital education, if that's okay. I'm ready for that.
Yeah.
Just that it says that the high needs budget is required to meet the cost of provision for inpatient children taught at all those 6 hospitals we teach at. That was decided by the Department for Education when recruitment finished, and our budget was based on the cost of the children in hospital, just the children inpatients in hospital in those 6 hospitals. And that money is for hospital teaching. It's throughout England that they're responsible for that. That money should not be used to teach any other children, just children in hospital. So I don't understand why we're talking about SLA between provision of inpatient hospital education, because that has been our job for 30 years. We teach children in hospital. It's paid for the DFE by the DFE. So why is that an issue? It doesn't cost the local authority anything. So I don't understand that. I know there's an issue around tuition for community children, because actually in Circular 732/2001 and 794, it said that the local authority are responsible for teaching those children who are not in school not in hospital who have got a medical and mental health problem. So I don't understand why that's all of a sudden become our responsibility. Because it's not.
So,
Anita.
okay, so I'll just come back on the finance bit, the funding bit, and then I expect Julie might want to say something about the SLA. So in terms of how we get the money into the DSG, it is based on previous year's expenditure. And therefore, because the hospital school delivers the community element as well, that is wrapped up in the same pot of funding from the DFE. It is obviously part of our overall high needs budget, and that's why we discuss it and always make proposals along with all the other proposals we make about the high needs budget. So I think that's really the points I'd just like to make about the financial and funding element.
You're always so helpful, but that's very few children out of the hospital school. We're talking about 10% of the children in the hospital school. It's not a huge number. So I still don't understand why we'd all of a sudden have to have an FLA for a job we've done for 30 years. If you want it just for the community children, that's different. Anyway.
I imagine that given that we've got a deficit, we need to very rigorously account for where all of the money's going.
I'm happy just to take the money from the Department for Education.
I'm sure. Don't think it works like that.
But I've been told that there's no way of separating it. I don't understand why money from the DFE can't be separated from the money. It doesn't make sense to me. I know you tried very hard to explain it to me, but it should be clear that money for children in the hospital is simply paid for by the DFE because that is the way it's funded throughout England, not just this borough.
Julie?
Sorry.
Anita,
the funding bit. The funding we get is not just for Chelsea Community Hospital School. It also covers any children that are in an independent sector provider. So it's and clearly as part of the other thing is that as part of the high needs funding regulations, we can't just pass that money on because we've got to fund other providers as well. And as already been said, we have to take account of it within our overall high needs position and the deficit that we're in. So I think we're being as clear and transparent as we can be about it and about the decision-making process.
They take the numbers from us every January for the DFE. You don't even know which private hospitals those children, do they give you their numbers? They don't, do they?
That's not what the funding is based on in the DSG, Jeanette. I mean, I think I have done a briefing note. I'm happy to share that briefing note, but the funding is not based on the numbers.
It doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, so should we pick up the technicality around this funding out of here with Jeanette? Julie, what were you going to add?
I was just going to say, Andrew, you're absolutely right that this came about because when we had to put together a deficit recovery plan, the DFE wanted to scrutinise it. They needed to know that every single budget item that was charged to the high needs block had been scrutinised. And one of the ways of being able to give an assurance is to say that we have a written service level agreement that clarifies roles and responsibilities and resources. And that way we have full transparency around all of the money that we are spending whilst we're carrying forward a cumulative deficit.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Jagdeep?
Come off mute.
Jagdeep, you there?
Yeah, I'm just coming off mute. So I just wanted to talk about I accept that we have to cap at bands 8 to 10, even though it's very painful for one of my schools. I accept that. Last year you did some brilliant work on making sure that we factored in the pay rises and you recalculate the bandings to match the pay rises that are happening. Now, I know that we've got a big pay rise that's come through and that will be agreed within a week, probably with the last union for support staff. Now, that with on cost is about £2,200 roughly for every band, term time only. And I'm wondering how that's going to be reflected in the bands.
It's a good question, Anita.
Because it is backdated.
Apologies, I wasn't off mute. I think that's a really good question, Jagdeep, and we've already started to, what are we going to do? And I think that's something that that's something that we're planning to, we're considering it, and it's something that we'll discuss with the next high needs review group, because clearly you know, you need to know what's possible, what we can do about it. But I completely understand it, the issue.
Well, it's about, it's 10%, isn't it? In reality, per adult, at least 10 to 12%, and so it can't be found, is what I'm trying to say. And when we've got, and one of the schools I'm leading in, there's 36 plans, it's not money that can just be found.
Yeah, okay,
And
maybe
if
we
you try
have
and
that
claw back at the same time, is what I'm trying to say. It would be quite impossible. But thank you.
Okay, Jagdeep, but maybe we take that as an action, a way to look at the costs of that.
When is the next meeting of the high needs job?
It's before the next forum meeting. I don't know the exact date. Julie, do you know?
There's one on the 21st of February, so definitely got one scheduled in the spring term.
Okay, we might want to bring that forward because we've got forum in January. So yeah, I thought they were always before forum. I think we need to relook at that, Julie, if that's possible.
Also, going back on your point, if there's going to be a significant issue with schools paying out salaries, which get backdated to September, and staff are going to be expecting them to be paid out by Christmas, aren't they, really? They weren't backdated to September, and they won't find out till January. That will be a problem.
Backdated to the
Backdated, sorry, to
yeah. Okay. We look at that.
Does that mean 6.1.2 needs to be amended?
Yes, that's what I'm suggesting.
Yes.
Okay, right, should we move this on? So
No, this is really serious to me. I've done a job for many, many years, and then I just get, this is a paragraph that says they're passing it on to Ormiston. I don't even know who they are. We have a huge team of people, all of whom are very experienced working at CPHS in psychology and support. We've been incredibly successful. Who's decided to hand it on to Ormiston Academies? Who? Who are they?
Jeanette, it doesn't actually say that. It says that the council are considering all the
They have
provisions,
told me that that's what's happening.
but that's not what it says
Okay,
in
they're
this.
telling me that's what's happening. I'm just asking, who's making those decisions? I've done this job for 30 years. Who's making a decision now without talking to me? That's what they're doing. Because we have been incredibly successful. All our young people coming in from psychiatric units and very, very ill have been successful. Why and who makes that decision without discussion to me? There is something in the governing body about taking care of staff who've done jobs for you without making these, say this is going to happen. It's so awful.
yeah, I think obviously looking at this, Julie might have something to say, but we're looking at the end of a lease, and I think the local authority and officers of the local authority have to explore
Can I tell you about the
value
lease?
for money and best practice. What we can't do in this formal meeting is go into the details of
Okay,
that.
fine,
Officers
fine.
need to
I
have a
just
meeting
want it
with
heard
you.
then.
They have to have
But
meetings.
actually,
Hang on, Jeanette, can I make my point, please?
yeah,
Officers need to explore what the best value for money would be going forward for these provisions. Now, obviously, that's going to be very difficult, and officers need to have those conversations with you. They need to explore other options too, otherwise they're not showing that value. But it's a large chunk
So
of money
how-
deficit.
how is it cheaper for Ormiston Academy to do the job that I've been doing all these years? How is it cheaper?
That's not
Or
a
are they
question
going to take some of the GFE?
that's-
Well, I'm sorry, when do these questions happen?
That's a question for Julie, Anita, and Ian, and Richard to pick up after this meeting. We as a forum are not going to decide
No, I
or,
know that.
or
I
second guess
just want
what
to be
might happen in
heard,
the
because
future.
you don't understand how dreadful it is. People make a decision without any discussion after all these years of such success. And I'm blinded by it.
Chair, can I just say that I thought we were all supposed to leave our individual school hats behind when we attended the meeting and represent
Yeah, we do in this paper have something specific about hospital education. So I understand the point, but it's not something that we are going to
I understand that.
resolve now. So
I understand
Jeanette, I totally understand, you know, your concerns, you're upset around this and the amount of time. But I think that the conversation that you need to have with officers.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
Ian out of here, so that they can have an frank discussion with you and look at what the best next steps are for this provision in light of us being in a deficit position on the high need.
It's cost you. That's what you don't understand.
I
Money comes from.
I know, but I'm just chairing this.
Okay, fine, fine. I've had my bit say. Over.
And we'll know that in the minutes. Thank you, Jeanette. Okay, so school forum, I'm asking you to note 6.11, the update from high needs block reference group on modelling and work around repayment funding received in error during 21-22. 6.12, an amendment here to provisionally agree to maintain the current capping bands of 8 to 10 at the set figure for the remainder of the academic year, but for officers to come back and look into the pay rises for support staff, with view that we bring forward the next high needs block reference group, and hopefully if we could do that before Christmas, Julie, that would be really great. And just note the additional funding for hospital education, section 5, and the progress towards developing a sense level agreement for hospital education.
Right.
Stephen.
Last time we actually for 6.12 we included the inflationary increase for staff. So would we not reword it to do the same this year?
Yes, I think that's what we're proposing. Isn't it?
I think you proposed to actually accept it provisionally, pending a discussion later on about it. We maybe do it the other way around to allow for the increase, so that if that is a decision that council could make it, or maybe it needs to make it so that it's possible to afford it really.
So I guess what we need to do is to assess it, because we don't know what the impact is. I'm not saying would be the reason for a decision, but we at least need to know, forum at least need to know what the impact of that additional cost is. I appreciate that's a cost that schools have, but so I don't, in my view, we couldn't take that decision without having that information.
Which really it's going to come back to the next forum.
Yeah.
It's really a council decision really though, because it's whether they can afford it or not really. Schools forum doesn't really have any powers as such to agree or veto a decision. We're a consultative group really, aren't we?
Yeah. So we as a consultative group need to look at those figures, and we need to bring them back and discuss them and make recommendations to the council.
I just thought it might be helpful to passport it onto schools as quickly as possible. Really.
Yes, we can do that through consultative. We've got secondary next week. I think we've got primary in the next couple of weeks.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So a bit of a job there, Anita. Sorry, we've landed that on you and your team to pick up. Okay, right. Let's move on to paper 8.5. Julie, I think we'll come back to you, and Anita on this one.
Yeah. Thank you. This paper is comparing practice in Kensington and Chelsea with a DFE research paper on the effective management of high needs budgets in local authorities. The research, which was published just at the end of the summer term, focuses on 10 case study authorities. Camden and Barnet are the nearest ones to us. There are a number of very specific recommendations, and in the report we have compared where we are now to what those recommendations are saying. The research paper does have a caveat that some of the evidence was anecdotal and may have been impacted by COVID in terms of temporarily suppressing demand in those authorities. And what we have heard from colleagues working in other authorities is that's absolutely true, that the 10, some of them are now feeling their high needs block significantly under pressure and about to be in a very similar position in terms of a deficit. I would draw attention to paragraph 310, which is recommendation number 10, because it specifically talks about learning from positive examples of innovative approaches to mainstream funding. And we will want to look at that through the High Needs Block Review Group, and we'll want to see how we can use the DBV, our participation in that programme, to get examples of practice that is taking place in other authorities. So not only will we find out, what the diagnostics say about us and what would be good levers in terms of grant funding, but the other participating authorities are sharing their learning and things that they're doing as part of that progress, that programme. So this is a good opportunity for us to make sure, belt and braces, that we are doing everything that we possibly can to manage the pressures that we have and get the deficit into a position that is more favourable than it currently is. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on this paper, Chris?
Yes, I was really interested to read this. Can you put me in the direction of where the outcomes are in relation? I mean, this is about managing a deficit budget and learning from best practice. But is there something that also demonstrates in those different boroughs the favourable outcomes, which one assumes there would be? The impact on that?
Yeah, it's slightly, the paper itself, the research paper, is slightly wider than deficit recovery. It's actually just about how local authorities who aren't overspending are currently managing. So what is it about them and the way that they work, and sharing that to give us an opportunity to say, well, have we tried these things? Do we think that they would work here? But the paper didn't actually produce that kind of due diligence that we're going to have to as our grant application, in terms of being able to say, as a result of doing X, you can save Y, and your outcomes are even better by. So that level of detail isn't in the paper. It literally is just some case studies about this is how it works there.
Sharon, where do you, I mean, this is all very creditable, but I mean, where do you think we differ from best practice? Because I'm, where do you think that the, savings, if one can be blunt, are to be found between us and the these flagship authorities? What particular areas?
Yeah, I mean, in many of the things that they're doing, we are already doing, or we're doing something different, or perhaps we've tried that and we've departed from it. So I think it's a whole system. It's not really a magic bullet. It's about how all of these things connect. But if I were to say what I think opportunities are available to some of those authorities that are not available to us, once you have a deficit, it's very difficult to invest in things, even if you know that investment will save. I think head teacher colleagues in the room would know that, there are high numbers of children with speech and language needs. Early intervention is highly effective. If we had the money to invest in more speech and language support, perhaps we would be able to turn the curve for some children's progress earlier, but you just don't have that money for investment when you're in a deficit position. So, participating in the delivering best value perhaps will give us the opportunity for some pump priming to do some of those things. It's a bit like, if you've got the money to get your car serviced, it's probably going to run better through the winter, isn't it? But if you're already overdrawn, you're going to have to kind of wing it. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Thank you.
Mariella.
Julie, thank you for all of this. Could you just say a little bit more about 3.5 and talking about sort of the forensic look at standard casework and what some of your work's been so far on that?
So this was just saying that if you don't have sufficient staffing to be able to kind of have efficient systems, you end up chasing your tail. And so some of the authorities that are in the safety valve, so the sort of 20 authorities with the biggest deficit budgets, just don't have capacity to improve the service that they're delivering. So, if you're on the back foot, you're having to spot purchase and you're having to use agency staff because you can't recruit to key roles. And we're getting sort of survey information back from the DFE that shows, particularly around education psychology, that those authorities with the biggest overspend just cannot attract psychologists. And so you can see, if you can't do the early intervention, by the time you actually can work with those children, the difficulties are entrenched, the gaps between them and their peers have widened. So this particular bit was saying, have a look at the way that you are structured and make sure that you've positioned yourself well to be able to do this. One of the things we found when we did the recalibration and the detailed review of the EBT is that a number of people processing the EBT leads to variations. And so we've been doing a little bit of testing work, seeing if, having fewer people working on that gives you a more consistent outcome. So in that particular case, it's better to have a smaller, more specialist team than have a larger team who are all doing it and then get multiple outcomes. So that's how we've kind of compared ourselves. We feel that we're really good in terms of our EPs and our kind of capacity to get our 20-week assessments done in time. But for the EBTs, we thought we needed to have this dedicated post, and that's what we're testing at the moment.
Just on the EBT, how long before you know that it's getting best value for money, and how would you know? Because presumably if one person's doing it and then new cases.
We are seeing some green shoots in terms of the direction of travel and the forecast. I mean, Anita's got other paper on this evening. It's a little bit early, isn't it? We're only kind of looking at half of the academic year, half of the financial year, sorry, and we're not even half of the academic year. But what we're seeing in terms of the recalibration looks better. And when we did the head teacher moderation exercise just before the end of the summer term, that certainly showed some consistency in the way that the recalibration was working.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. David, did you have a question?
Yeah, Julie, item 3.10, this reference to perverse incentives. So is this another way of just alluding to idiosyncratic elements, being inventive, being innovative? That's how I understand it.
One of the difficulties in the system at the moment, a perverse incentive, we've had the SEND Executive Partnership Board today, and we heard from Frida O'Driscoll, who heads up CLCH's therapy services, that at the moment there is no commissioned service if you need directly delivered speech and language therapy unless you have an EHCP. So in order to get that service, you need to go through a statutory assessment and get an EHCP. That is a perverse incentive, isn't it? Because we are, cranking the machine and running the whole system when what you actually need is a bit of direct delivery from a speech and language therapy. So we'd like to get to a situation where you only get a plan if you need a plan, because that's right for you, not as a ticket to get you something else.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on paper 85? Okay, great. So I asked Forum to note the report recommendations from 411 and 412, which is the comparison practice in K&C, and some of the further issues and areas identified that are going to be considered by the HMDLG. So I really do think that the colleagues on Forum who are down to be in those, great if they could attend them into those conversations and or bring them back and forth things. Okay, paper A6. Now, there was an amendment sent out to paper A6 earlier today, so I hope you've got the correct version in front of you and not an older copy. So, Anita, over to you to look at DSG, and I believe there might be glimmers of good news in this.
Yes, as Julie sort of alluded to, we have got some good news. We've had an increase in the DSG that we were not expecting in relation to funding for, most of it relates to funding that we've received in relation to the expansion of Kensington Queens Mill. So I say we weren't expecting that when we set the budgets. So then when we look at the forecasts overall on each block, break even on early years, small underspend on the schools and central schools block, and just to confirm that the underspend on the falling roles fund, we will take account of that in the budget setting for next year. And then on the high needs block, we've got 154,000 forecasts underspend. That is mainly so we've got some overspends and we've got some underspends, but because we've had this 890,000 increase in the DSG, that's really reflecting that, even with our overspends on the independent sector, which is again something that Julie's mentioned in relation to the Delivering Better Value programme from the DFE. And so there is information in the paper, just a summary information about schools at risk of deficit, which is okay at the moment, but points made about the non-teaching pay award as well as the teaching pay award. We know that when we come on to look at the school budget paper, we know that that's just adding pressure because they're not funded in full. And so we do think that when we look at the 3-year budget plans that schools have done, that does show there's 14 schools that are at risk of going into deficit. And no doubt, when these 3-year budget plans rerun with potential budgets for next year, that will unfortunately increase. But good news on the deficit is that our cumulative deficit at the end of this year, we now think will be 7,389,000. And that's about £2 million better than the deficit recovery plan. As Julie said, it's still early days, so there's a lot of things that may still change. But this is very good news in terms of what this first look at the DSG is looking like. So let's hope that this continues, and that also potentially helps us with some of these other cost pressures.
Okay, thanks, Anita. Any questions on paper 86?
Yes, Chair. Have the opening of Queen's Mill reduced the number of placements, independent placements, or have we just taken the Queen's Mill pupils from the sort of general pool of pupils in the borough, so to speak?
So the children that have been admitted to Queen's Mill have gone in at a phased transfer. So they either were coming from Goulburn and Maxilla autism nursery provision, moving into starting school and starting KQ, or perhaps they were at a special school somewhere else and at secondary transfer or post 16 have moved across. So that's the points at which they've moved.
So it's avoiding a placement in the independent sector rather than moving them out.
Transferring back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a choice now for the parents, presumably, at transfer.
Right. So that would mean that we will reduce. I think that's what the question.
Yeah.
is.
No.
That means we will reduce the use of independent.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions on A6? Okay, great, thank you. So ask the committee to note the report in section 5.1. So 5.11, I'm not going to read out all of the numbers there, but we can see the numbers around the DSG cumulative deficit and how that compares to a deficit management plan. And at 5.12, potential increase in the number of schools with deficits, and that support will be provided to schools most at risk of going into deficits. Note that, please, which takes us then now on to A7, and then we'll be going on to A8, which is national funding formula proposals, second stage consultation. And I think that we're as schools entering quite a tricky time and difficult territory with regard to inflationary pay increases and also proposed increases coming from the DFE and potentially further spending cuts at DFE. So I think this is, for the next couple of years, going to be quite tricky for us for them. But Anita, over to you on this.
Sorry, did you want me to? I'm having a little bit of trouble here. Am I covering A7 and then going into A8? Yeah.
Just go
good.
A7,
Thank you.
and then we'll get into that shortly.
Yeah, so I'm only just going to pick up some of the headlines from A7. You will know the outcomes of the first stage, that there is the continued move to the national funding formula, and they're saying that the plan now is that will be within 5 years, i.e. that every school will be funded by the national funding formula by 27-28. And the other things that have been consulted on in this second stage consultations are still allowing a transfer from the schools block to the high needs block where there's deficits, and there's a series of hoops that we'd have to jump through to get that agreed. Also, they're proposing to continue with notional SEN funding, which, as you know, is something that's identified within the school's budgets. There's proposals around how schools with growth and falling roles may be funded in future, which could be a bit different than the way we currently fund them. And then there's also some proposals around how split sites are funded, which potentially impacts on a small number of schools in Kensington and Chelsea. I think they're the main things I wanted to pull out from paper A7. I'll just pause there in case there's any questions.
Yeah, just to clarify on section 2.2, introduced new transparency requirements for MAT pooling. I presume that's multi-academy trusts, is it?
Oh, that's a very good point, Peter. Yes, that abbreviation should have been spelt out. Yes, multi-academy trusts.
Okay, thank you.
Anita, could you just talk a little bit more about item 4.15, popular growth?
Yeah, so currently, so academies that are so I think it's mainly academy that may have been a school that has been transferred because they're Ofsted results, so they've then been transferred to an academy, and then as that academy becomes successful and pupil numbers increase, they then get funded for those pupil number increases in advance, whereas a maintained school only gets the funding from the following April. So the numbers may have increased from any time during that school year, but the funding wouldn't actually be provided until the following April. So the proposal is, and this was something that we responded into the first stage consultation, is that academies and maintained schools should be subject to the same treatment, so that not just one sector receives growth funding in this way.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions on A7? Okay, great, thank you. Right. I was committed to note the report and endorse the recommendations in section 6. 6.1, school forum recommended to note the DfE second stage consultation proposals, share the MFF and the council response to the consultation. Okay, right, thank you. Paper A8, provisional dedicated schools grant and lunch funding formula review for 2024. Anita.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. So I think everyone knows we've got to move at least 10% closer to the NFF next year, and that the minimum funding guarantee has got to be between a 0% increase or a 0.5% increase. Table at 2.4 is a concern, as is the table 2, is that our schools block, and okay, at the moment it's still based on the October 21 pupil numbers, but I'll come on and talk about that in a second. That's only showing a 0.9% increase overall. And then when we look at what will be delegated to schools, it is, a 1% increase. So as already been referred to, this is not going to cover the cost of both the teaching and the non-teaching pay awards, and is a concern. We have been there's been lobbying with the DfE from members and from both boroughs as well, to see if that presents a stronger case from officers. And I have to say at this point, and I know that head teacher groups and other groups have also been lobbying government and the DfE. I have to say at the moment, I'm not convinced that there's going to be any additional funding put into the DSG for next year. I'd love to be proved wrong, but we all know what the financial position is. So that is going to make things really, really tough. And then when we look at what's happening with the roll numbers, so the separate paper that we'll come on to talk about on the pupil number projections, and just looking at the indicative census numbers that are there already, the provisional numbers for those that are available. That shows that overall in the funding, the potential reduction of 27 pupils, and maybe more, maybe less than that, and that would mean that the DSG would go down by about 187,000. So the percentage increase would remain the percentage increase per pupil would remain the same, because obviously it'd be divided by a lower number of pupils, but leading to a very, very challenging funding position for schools. And then we go on to the options, which unfortunately, even though I'd asked the DFE for for an indicative idea of whether they'd support this RMFG disapplication, they said had to submit a full disapplication request, and then they did request a meeting, and the very clear advice is that we would not get something agreed where we were putting a higher level of MFG for all schools, and because this was outside of the national parameters. And why should Kensington, and also we applied for Westminster separately, why should those two boroughs be treated differently to every other borough? So even though I made the point about these pay awards and why shouldn't we be helping schools to cover this through a higher MFG, that there was a real push that we do that by adjusting our ARPU. So that's why then the later models came out, and those revised models, and that's the choice before them now, between one which is moving 10% closer to the NFF factor values with a 0.5% minimum funding guarantee, so a 0.5% increase, and then we use the ARPU as the balancing figure. And the other one is moving 15% closer to the NFF values with 0.5% MFG, and again the ARPU as the balancing factor. So there's not an awful, there's not a lot of difference between those two factors. But over to you.
Right, thanks, Anita. So before we get into the options, are there any questions on aspects of the paper? And then we'll discuss the options separately, because that's usually a meeting discussion one. No? Should we just get straight to the options? Okay, right. Options 1 and 2. I think, Anita, I'm right in saying that you have no strong view on either option. Is that correct?
No, I don't have a strong view. That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Foreign colleagues, any views on which option is preferable? Peter?
Well, as a default, I just felt that if we're going to get an NFF imposed, we might as well move 15% towards it rather than 10. But that isn't a strong view, or at least that was my default view after reading the paper.
Yeah, I think that was my view as well, given the direction of travel. But happy for colleagues to dissuade otherwise. And were you going to say something?
Yeah, just to, I can afford some clarity in regard to the primary head's perception of this.
Yeah.
So they discussed this at length. Remember, you attended the meeting, Anita. It's quite useful. Seems a long time ago now, though. Things have shifted again since then. But the primary heads are in attendance this evening. I think we're all here, actually. I think they're online. Yeah. So, colleagues, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right in saying that there are two points we want to make. One is that, as always, we attempt to be collegiate with regard to our primary peers. So we've always opted here to go for the option that benefits the most primary schools. I think I'm right in saying, colleagues, that it is option 2. Is that correct?
Nods there, yeah.
It does strike me as very negligible, the differences, particularly for schools like some of the schools. It's just literally almost identical.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Jackie.
I'm being true to form tonight. It's on the percentages for me. I just want to know, Anita, because I did ask via email but I don't know that. Anyway, would the two sets of figures still have very small differentials if 5% extra suddenly came through from the government in the autumn statement?
I suspect so, because if there was still a 0.5% MFG, I don't think it would. And I'm just thinking of the original models, they still weren't, even with the higher MFG, they weren't moving a lot of money around. So I suspect it wouldn't make a huge difference.
The only reason why I ask that is because when we saw the original, you sent 3 options originally to primary heads, and the last one was moving fully to NFF. At that time, it looked like there was quite big differentials when you moved to full NFF between one particular secondary school got a huge wad of cash, and lots of primary schools lost monies. I'm just wondering whether that would happen if with 5%. Would there be more of a differential? Is what I'm trying to get to, really. But you're pretty certain there wouldn't be.
Well, there would be more of a differential, but I'm sorry.
I'm comfortable going with option 2 and moving towards the NFF, but I just want to be. I just feel that I'm not sure I agree with you. That I think something will come through in the autumn statement. They've got too many horrible things to deal with to take on everybody at the same time.
I mean, I disagree with that, James. I'd be very surprised if they give us 5%, given the scale of cuts that I think it was 50 billion hole was announced this afternoon.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'd be surprised if we find the 5%. It's huge.
Given the reserve positions of schools across the country, there's billions in reserves in schools. I think they're going to turn the taps on and drain them.
This will be the biggest cut to education in ever. If that happens, it'll be bigger than 1981.
Yeah. Lawrence.
Anita, can I ask you a general question? The baseline figures, they include the supplementary grant that we got, and that's quite a large number. My understanding is that's on a financial year basis. So are you pretty certain that we're going to get a supplementary grant at a similar level from April 2023?
Oh, so what's happened with that is that's now added into the DSG. So there's not going to be a separate grant at all. Unless there is a decision.
So that has actually been, we can be pretty certain we're going to get that when we do our budgeting for next school year.
Yeah, so when we look at that schools block funding, so if I look at it across the whole borough, that the fact the 22-23, the 81.162 million, that includes the SSG that there was in 22-23, but now it's rolled up in the DSG, so you won't get it as a separate grant. It's just part of this.
You've got some assurance that similar level of additional funding is going to go into the next year.
It's already in there, so I don't think it's going to be in addition to these figures. It's already in.
I don't mean in addition.
Right, it's definitely in there because we can see it. We can see it when you work out the minimum funding guarantee in the model.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? I think Kathleen, you had your hand up. It's got Stephen as well. Stephen, do you want to go?
Well, my question is just about the minimum funding guarantee. I say this at every meeting. It's about how much can we keep for as long as we can before the national funding formula takes it away. And therefore, I'm actually not for option 2 because it just speeds up the process, really. I'd wait as long as possible. Just my opinion, though. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions around options? So, Chris.
Maybe you mentioned what the option was for the climate events. Do we have similar information about options for April?
There wasn't a strong view last in September.
Yeah.
End of September. We were happy to go, particularly, what would benefit some of the primaries that were struggling, to be honest. Our view.
So, the head teacher's preferred options might not be agreed. The secondary heads didn't.
Primary heads have a strong view.
I think the minutes, and I think it is important to record, Andrew just said, do not take that for granted. Level of collegiality.
Okay, right, so I think obviously Stephen has said he would prefer option 1. I haven't heard any other voices for option 1. Seems to be that there are more, as what Peter said, primary colleagues who are online. Came out secondary, that option 2, and the NFF, the more predominant option. Agreed? Yeah, should we vote? Yeah. Okay. I need my special piece of paper. I think we might be all right here. Okay. So could I ask, I think it's Kathleen and Sarah Claire online who can vote. So if you just raise your hands for the various options. So all those in favour of option 1. Stephen? Oh, Kathleen is option 1. All those in favour of option 2? Okay, so option 2 carries. Thanks for that, everyone. So if we move on to the recommendations, ask the committee to note the report. Also recommendations of in section 8. Schools Forum are recommended to, as per 8.11, review updated figures after information being received from the ESFA. But before the 21st of January, after for the APT submission that we made. 8.12, agree which of the 2 funding formulas, option D10 and section 5 is supported, which is option 2. 8.13, note the steps for finalising schools funding for 23-24 in section 7. 8.14, confirm agreement to transfer as per the paper, 0.5% to the high needs block as part of the deficit management plan. That's something that we do every year, and that was agreed at 15th of June. 8.15, note the proposals. Note that the proposal will be brought to the January meeting of the schools following regarding growth of roles funding, a delegation to maintain schools including any yeah, okay. Move on to paper A9. I'm just going to say something about this and it's linked to A10. So this is review of fallen roles funds. And I think we've looked at some of the data that's come in the last week, in fact, around what the numbers are at the October census, which is the majority of the primary schools, got some of the maintained secondary schools. And I think what we're proposing before we get into the report is a working party on this criteria of falling roles, because we've had a number of years of significant roles. There's guidance currently at the minute for 3 years of funding, and also that there's a discussion of the potential decision of 100% ORPU versus 80% of ORPU. We have around 10 schools that we think, based on those figures in A10, that might be eligible for falling roles funding. And I think what we're discussing, Anita, Richard, is to look at some of the numbers in A10 and a working party of going into some real detail as to what the impact on the DSG might be of having so many schools that are triggering that falling roles funding. Take a look at it and report back comprehensively on it, rather than making a decision now blinded without the data in front of us on what the impact for everybody else might be, given that we're moving into a position politically where there may be, 1% increase and significant increases in inflationary pay and gas and electricity bills. What we'd be looking for, I think, really is someone to chair that from this forum, probably someone who hasn't got falling roles, so that they can take a balanced view. And then going into the secondary primary heads consultatives to see if there are any head teachers and also governors who would like to take it to the governors forum, would like to be a part of that working party to flesh out what we are looking at in terms of the impact on DSG. Anita, is there anything else on A9?
Oh, I think you covered everything, Andrew. Thank you.
Okay, and I think we have to note thank you to Richard and Wendy and the team, because they've had to do the RBKC Education BI team had to do quite a lot of work to pull out this data and get it ready in a timely fashion.
Yeah.
It was 7th of January, wasn't it?
That's right. Well, just exactly as you say, Andrew, the purpose of you've really got an extract of what will be a fuller report around place planning and projections. That will come to the next school forum in January. The reason for this, exactly as Andrew said, the reason you've got this extract with the headlines is to inform the work that you're doing around performing roles funding. So hopefully it will be helpful in terms of informing the work of that group, because exactly the data is showing which schools could potentially be affected. And of course that would influence the decisions that you're making about the funding that you get for the performing roles.
Can I just come back to you, Andrew? I think I understood it, and I'm not sure whether it's right. You were talking about the working group, which is a working group that reports to the schools forum. So it's a schools forum working group, but it would be comprising members who not belong to the forum.
Which is like the SEN High Needs Reference Group. It's exactly the same.
Is it? They have members.
Yeah. Sarah, have you got your hand up? Oh, I think you might be still voting. That's a strong vote. Okay, are there any members of the forum who'd like to be a part of that working party and would be interested in sharing that? Mariana?
Yes.
That's falling.
Can't chair it, so
Yeah.
you have fallen role.
Agreed, I'd like to be on it, but I can't share it.
Mariana, do you want, would you be happy to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dave, do you want to be on the?
Yeah, I would be eligible because we don't have a full role, but I definitely don't chair it, but I'm very happy to be a member of that.
Sorry, are we allowing people onto that group who do have full role?
I think we can't preclude people. That would be unfair, but I think certainly, Richard, can we ensure that when we go into the primary secondary consultatives that we get fair and equal representation?
We need to make sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we know the names today, and then we can have a look at that and take that back to the partnership groups to make sure we get the balance right.
Well, it'd be useful then, wouldn't it? Because the people who have falling roles would be representing all those schools that have falling roles, putting that point across.
That's another way of looking at it,
I
absolutely.
think you made the point earlier, didn't you? You're supposed to come in to this meeting as representatives of the primary session, rather than from the own school. They carry that into any working group. And I think you need to challenge if that didn't happen.
Yes.
I think it's just about representation and objectivity, and ensure that if candidates utilise this, then we can answer that. We've got some hands up. Jagdeep.
Just saying, I'd like to be part of the group.
Okay.
I can have one half of my body in the room and have one half out if you want. So that I'm representing. So I'm not. So because then I could represent whichever school is applicable in terms of falling roles or not.
Okay, great. Sarah, is that a hand up for being part of the group? Fabulous, thank you. Kathleen, is that the same for you?
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Andrew.
Brilliant. Okay. All right. So
the secondary.
I think that
Yeah.
would be good, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, fantastic. So in terms of the actions on there, so it is just we're not doing 711. So we're not recommending that at the moment. So the first recommendation is to form a working party to look at the current data on all roles and assess the impact on the DSG in the next financial year. 712, note the proposed allocations will be brought, or some proposals of allocation will be brought to the January 23 schools forum meeting and will be subject to the individual schools submitting the following roles and deficit management plan. Anita, can I just clarify, do we have to have the following roles, criteria and all of that sorted by the APT submission date?
Yes, we do as part of that return.
So there's a lot to do in the next 6 weeks on this then. Okay, paper 810, primary and secondary school projections and capacity. And I know there'll be a full paper on this in January, Richard, but again, this is just back to what I was just saying about team putting together some of the numbers.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll see the headlines there. I mean, just to say there is a typo here. You might have spotted it. Is the sentence which reads the Northfield Borough is presenting at 18%, and so is the Northfield Borough presenting at 9% as well. No, it's the Southfield Borough is 9%. The overall at the moment, from the figures that we have from May, are that 14% across the borough current surplus capacity. The average across London is 18. They're the headlines at the moment. Very different picture in secondary. We have places over capacity, you'll see there. And then, of course, you get into the detail of individual schools and current capacity and current cohorts. You'll see that the word provisional, we're finalising that data that we have on all those schools. This will all feed into the overall school place planning and projections report that will go to head teacher groups and will come back to school forum as well in January. I haven't stuck any questions on it's here.
Yeah. Okay, any questions on those provisional numbers?
They are provisional numbers based on May dates, did you say?
The October census for May dates.
Yeah.
Right,
So,
okay.
so the individual schools is the October census. The overall report is based on where we were in May.
I can take this out of the meeting, but
You've got a different figure, and that's something we probably will need to work through.
Okay, form.
Chair, I do have a question.
Oh, Jagdeep, thank you.
I'm sorry, I just got one question about how do these numbers compare to the ISOS predictions that we had some months ago and less than a couple of years ago? How are they comparing to that, and are they actually in line with that, or are we actually overshooting, undershooting? Where are we at?
Yeah, it's pretty much as expected where we are, and that's just a very general interpretation of what we know. As I say, Jagdeep, obviously we do a more thorough analysis of that against our original projections, and you'll be able to see that in the report. You'll be able to see where we were and what the projection is going forward. But I think the general headline is there are no surprises here. This is broadly in line with what we expected. What that means is not to get into too much the discussion around addressing surplus places, is that the actions that are currently in place are appropriate.
And that's the surplus of places that's going to grow by 3%. Do we know if that's going to be even across the borough, or it's going to be in parts of the borough?
That is something we'll tease out in the full report, Jagdeep.
Thank you.
Thanks
very much.
That's right. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Jagdeep. Any other questions? Sarah, was that hand up? Okay. Right, forum is asked to note the report. Item A11, any other business? Okay, great. That concludes this meeting. Thank you.
Brilliantly chaired.
It's alive. I hope it's alive.
Very brilliantly chaired.
Because I've got a record.
Thank you.
Not that we have a clock watch.
Than the lower one. Yeah, yeah. quite
I think that's right. Yeah. Yeah, so